Josh Wymore.
There. All right. Hey, thanks for coming out on a cold Saturday morning. I thought we were done with these cold temperatures, but apparently not. It's good to see you all here today. Well, let's just be honest. It's kind of awkward to get up in front of a bunch of people and promote humility, because you're probably wondering, like, who is this guy who is apparently super humble that we are supposed to be learning from today? And why does he think he's the expert? Well, the good news is I am actually the expert. I am the world's leading expert on humility, and probably the humblest person you've ever met in your entire life. So you should just be glad that you're here today. No, okay, I swear, that is the last time I will lie to you today. The truth is, I'm actually not a naturally humble person at all. And anyone who's known me for more than 10 years or so will swear that I'm not being falsely modest when I say that. This is a work in progress for me. And the reason I care so much about this, and the reason I think you should care about it, is because I've seen the difference that humility makes. I brushed up against a leader who was humble, and he had tools I just did not have in my toolbox. He was able to do things and live it in peace in a way that I could not live, and I thought, man, I have got to figure out how to do that. And so I've been on this almost 20-year journey of trying to become a humbler leader and helping other people do the same. And I want to convince you today that you should become obsessed with becoming humble. That humility is the foundation of good leadership, that humility is the foundation of effective relationships, that, man, you should just go all in on that. It should be the top goal of your own personal development. But before I get there and before I share some of that research, let me start by telling you a little bit more about that story of when I fell in love with humility. So on the right here is college sophomore Josh. You can see I have no beard at this point. And I was a college softball coach. So I'm a sophomore in college, and I'm the assistant softball coach of our university's team. And maybe hearing that makes you think, wow, Josh, you must have been some sort of athletic prodigy. You're a college student and you're the assistant coach. But nothing could be further from the truth. I was basically a glorified ball boy who would shag fly balls for a fraction of what they pay a real professional at this small college. So I'm like the Michael Scott of assistant softball coaches. And I know this. I'm not oblivious to this. I'm very aware that the women I'm going to coach who are like my age or older, their bat bags have more coaching experience than I do. And so I'm wondering, how are these women going to respect me when I have no experience? And so I'm like reading books on softball, and I'm preparing for everything, and I'm thinking, okay, what do I do so that they have confidence, they believe the direction that I'm giving them? And I have this realization, or this, what I think is this light bulb moment of, okay, people don't trust coaches who are tentative or not confident, so I'm just going to be really confident. And if I'm really confident, they'll think I know what I'm doing, and so they'll just follow me naturally. So just try to kind of mask my incompetence with confidence. Anybody know anyone like that? Yeah. Okay, please stop pointing fingers. That's not helpful here. So this is what I tried to do, and as you can probably imagine, it did not go very well. Basically, every practice, one of the players, who again has a lot of valid experience to share, would come up to me and suggest a different way to do the drill that I was doing or something. Because go figure, they've been doing this for forever. But for me, I think if I'm not confident, they won't trust me. I've got to be right. If I'm not right, they're not going to believe me. And so as the player comes over and says, hey, Josh, I think we should be doing this drill this different way, my response every time is, no, this is the way we're doing it. Get back in line. And would you believe they hated my guts for that? Right? Can you imagine? And so just like every day, we're just like butting heads, and it was exhausting for me. Our team was terrible. We won like 13 of our 40 games that year, and so it was just emotionally exhausting. And so our coach left, and in came a new coach, who's the guy on the left there, named Brad. And when I first met Brad, I actually felt some pity for him because Brad has this really mellow, laid-back way, kind of like, hey, buddy, yeah, good to see you. Glad you're here. And I know these softball girls. I mean, they carry bats around in their backpacks like they're Ninja Turtles or something. So it's like, this is not going to go well for Brad. He's like too chill. And I'm kind of just waiting preemptively for him to get run over by these ladies. But surprisingly, he doesn't. They actually respect him, even though Brad actually has no softball coaching experience. This probably tells you a little something about our university. We hired 2 coaches without any softball experience. But he's actually okay being wrong. And surprisingly, people don't just shut him down. They actually respect him more. And this really came to a head for me one day when Brad asked me to stay after practice and to talk. And we sit down in this dusty first base dugout, and he starts to talk to me about this player. And he asked me, hey, what's going on with Lindsay? And as soon as he says her name, I know what this is about. Lindsay and I have been butting heads. I've been, kind of snippy with her. He's going to confront me on it. And so my defenses are just ready to come up. This is a confrontation. I know how this is going to go. But as he's asking me these questions in a really gentle, loving kind of way, my defenses never come up. Because I can tell he's just curious. Hey, tell me what's going on here. What seems to be the problem? I'm noticing some tension there. Tell me more about that. And he continues on this conversation and basically challenges me and says, hey, you're going to have a lot of difficult people in life, and I want to see you grow through this to become the kind of leader who can resolve tension like this. And on our team right now, you're a leader, and you set the tone for the rest of the team. And so I really want to challenge you to step up. And the whole time he's doing this, again, I can't get mad at this guy because he's so nice about it. And so I'm half listening to what he's saying, but my other half of my brain is this guy's got some sort of Jedi mind trick. I got to figure out how to do what he's doing right now. This is amazing. And so at the end of this confrontation where he told me to basically man up, I give this guy a hug and have decided, I've got to go figure out how to do what Brad did, because that's amazing. That's not how my relationships with these softball players are going now. I got to figure out this trick. Well, a few years later, I read a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Anybody read this book? Great book. You haven't read it. It's about 20 years old now. But in it, Collins profiles these 15 companies that went from just being merely average to being truly exceptional. That's their financial results you see on that line spiking up. They had these incredible results, and they sustained them over a period of a decade or more. And Collins and his team is trying to understand what is it about these organizations that was so different. And there were a lot of factors that came up, but one of the common threads that was true for every single organization is they had a leader who was both humble and ambitious. And this result was so surprising that Collins just kind of dismissed it multiple times. It can't be the leader, it's got to be something else. But they just couldn't ignore it. It came up again and again and again. And as they looked at this paradox of humility and confidence, the confidence piece wasn't surprising. Because as we think about CEOs of big organizations, we think, yeah, they're hard-charging, they get results, they have difficult conversations. And that was true of all these leaders. But the humble part was the really surprising part. Because we often don't think about those things going together. It's either you get results or you're a nice person. It's not one and the same. But every single one of these leaders, what he called these level 5 leaders, every one of them had that duality. And none of their comparison organizations did. A lot of their competitors had really smart leaders. They called them the genius with 1,000 helpers. They were the smartest person in the room. Everyone just came and did their bidding. And actually, they did pretty well oftentimes while they were in charge. But if that person's ego got too big, they couldn't be challenged, they would fire their best people, or the best people would leave, or that person retired and there was this leadership vacuum and the organization just plummeted afterward. But these good to great leaders, these level 5 leaders, they built organizations that were sustainable because it wasn't about them. It wasn't about their ego. They were invested in the pipeline behind them. They built systems that would be self-sustaining, all these incredible things to actually build the organization. And so when I read this book, and so did another 20 million people or whatever, I realized, okay, this thing that Brad did, this humility, was not just some sort of softball conversational Jedi trick. This is actually like a thing. This is like a principle, something that works actually in leadership across the board. And as a Christian, I should have known that, right? Because we talk about this all the time. But knowing you should be humble and actually becoming humble are two different things. I think we can all agree with that, right? And seeing this business case really crystallized for me, oh my gosh, I've really got to get more serious about it. That's what I want to talk about today is that case. My book was written intentionally from a research perspective because there's been a lot of religious books written about humility, and there's some really good ones out there. And I'm going to talk about some of the religious perspective because, we're all family of God today. But specifically what I want to share is some of the research, which maybe you're not aware of around this, and then some practical things you can do to actually become humbler. Because we need to become humbler. If you want to be this good to great, if you want that to be your trajectory for your organization or church, this is foundational. And as we think about our organizations in general, we're not at that place. The research on the state of our organizations is actually pretty scary right now. Research from Gallup shows that 70% of our employees in our organizations are disengaged. And disengaged can mean a number of different things. It means everything from like they show up and they just kind of like do the minimum, they don't really care. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario engaged is they're like working another job while they're on the clock for you. Okay? So you think about like those team projects you're on and it's like, am I the only person who cares? Maybe you actually are. Statistically, you might be the only person who cares, right? This is a problem. And the truth is that we often look at those people and think, well, they're just lazy. They don't have work ethic. They're Gen Z, right? We think of all these reasons why they are the way they are. But research by Gallup also shows that 70% of the variance in that engagement is from their leader. Meaning the quality of the person who leads you is actually the most important factor determining your success, your engagement, your productivity at work. The research on the book Multipliers shows this, that multipliers actually get more out of their people than they even thought was possible. And that the opposite category of diminishers, they actually reduce the IQ and the productivity of their people. So there's tons of research showing that the people that you're working with have this huge impact on you, which is good news for nonprofits, good news for churches in the sense that the solution to getting your congregants more engaged, to getting your employees more engaged, is not that you need to spend $1 billion on a new benefits package or whatever. It's improving the quality of leadership on the front lines, on those middle lines. Because as those leaders get better, as Craig Groeschel says, as the leader gets better, everybody wins. Leadership is the biggest lever you have to pull in order to change the culture and the tone of your organization. Now, this is true just in organizations in general, but if we get real specific for churches, which is what we're here today, we know churches in America are not in great shape overall. And this graph may be kind of small, but just to explain it here, this is weekly church attendance from 1993 to 2020. You can see 45% of Americans were attending in 1993, and it's down to about 29% right now. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not here to dissect that, but I think it's safe to say that most people would say that their churches are not healthier, stronger, building disciples better than they were a couple decades ago. 8 out of 10 Christians would say that America faces a leadership deficit. And pastoral stress, pastoral burnout, all that kind of stuff is just skyrocketing right now. So you think about the same principles that are happening in organizations in general, they're definitely happening in churches in particular. And that's what I want us to think about today specifically is, for you all as lay leaders in churches, what's your part to play in this process? Right? You're not like setting strategy for your churches, maybe. I mean, maybe if you're on a council, you are. But how does this matter for you as just like a normal everyday person? You might say, I'm not a manager, I don't lead people, I'm just kind of here because I'm in I work in kids ministry or whatever. Well, again, the truth is that you think about that 70% variance that comes from the people you lead, or the people who are led by you. Think about the variation of like what happens in a room with a bunch of 4-year-olds. You know, if you're the elite, any like teachers in kids ministry here today work with like elementary school, yes, okay. It's like the Wild West in there, man. You just like doing whatever you want. No supervision, right? Like that is your kingdom. And if you show up and you're bringing your A game that day, your kids have a great day, hopefully. Sometimes you can't control kids, right? Sometimes they do what they want to do. If you're having a rough day, then your kids have a rough day, right? And each of you has these little spheres of influence, these little pockets where it's a small group you lead or a ministry that you're invested in, right? Like you're creating a culture, a bubble around you. You're rubbing off on those people around you. And so the quality of who you are, how you show up in those moments is huge. For the other people who are not coming to church, what they see you do inside of work, outside of work, they're determining like what a Christian is. You know, is this just like a normal person who just goes to church on Sunday and that's it? Or is this like someone who, they have a radically different life? They're marked by different values and virtues than I am. I would argue, and I think Scripture and research argues too, that humility is this foundational thing. You can't be teachable if you're not humble. You can't love other people well if you're not humble, because it just distorts everything around you. And so for the sake of our ministries, for the sake of our witness, for the sake of our churches, I think you should become obsessed with humility. Let me take a little bit more time to just explain what humility is. Here's my goal for today, is to teach you the 4 pillars of humble leadership and equip you to become humbler in one simple but powerful way. So today's going to be a little workshop-y, not just keynote. You're actually going to do some stuff and interact with each other. If you didn't realize you were signing up for that, you can grab a pastry and kick out now. That's totally fine. Or if you see the people around you and you think, I don't know if I want to interact with those people, feel free to get up and shuffle. But you'll be interacting with each other a little bit later on today. So let's dive into what those pillars are. And again, as a researcher, I wanted to go to research to see what the social science research said about this. Since Jim Collins wrote his book 20 years ago, there's been 2 decades of research on humility in the context of leadership. And I want to share with you what research says humble leadership is. 4 things. Here's the first one, an accurate self-perception. Accurate self-perception. My friend Arlen sums it up in this really nice rhyming way. He says, an accurate view of me and you. And this is in contrast to what we often think of when we think of humility. Because most of us, when we close our eyes and think of a humble person, we think of that person who, like when you go over to their house for dinner and you say, hey, that was a great meal. They say, oh, no, gosh, it was terrible. The chicken was dry and, the salad was kind of, limp. The lettuce was limp. And you kind of have to, argue with them and convince them that it was actually good. You kind of know what I'm talking about? Maybe it's just me as, a Texan Southerner where, the compliment thing happens that way. But really, that's actually not humility. That's either false modesty or low self-esteem. Humility, humble leaders actually see themselves accurately. And so when you tell that person it's a great meal, they say, yeah, you know what? It was a great meal. Man, I'm so glad it turned out that way. Not in a prideful way, but just yeah, that is reality. That was a really good meal. They understand themselves accurately because they know that managing themselves begins with understanding themselves. In other words, if I don't know that I talk too much, how am I going to know that I need to talk less? Right? If I don't know that I have a strength, then I'm not going to show up and give the best of what I have to offer to the people around me. I have to understand reality. The word humble, the root from it, humus, the Latin, actually means ground. And so when you say that somebody's grounded or they got 2 feet on the ground, we're actually saying they're humble, right? They're living in reality. Things only change in reality, and so if we're not living in reality, we cannot affect reality. We cannot change reality. And so this is the first piece, is if you're going to be humble, you have to know what your gaps are, what your strengths are. And know that everybody has those, right? That's, especially as Christians, I think we have a greater lens into accurate self-perception than probably anybody else because we see that we are both created in the image of God. There's incredible gifts, incredible brilliance. I think C.S. Lewis says that, you're not surrounded by any mere mortals. If you saw the person around you the way that they are truly seen, as eternal beings, you would be afraid or you would worship them because they're so amazing. And yet, on the other side, we're broken and marred by the fall. Every one of us has issues. Every one of us has gaps. And this is a duality we live with, right? It's not one or the other. It's both at the same time. And as I understand that and embrace that, I achieve this sense of security because I realize there's nothing I could do to make God love me anymore, nothing I could do to make him love me any less. I can just be content with where I'm at, continue to try and grow, continue to try and be sanctified, but not feel the need to hide those weaknesses because everybody's got them, right? If I'm trying to hide that stuff, the only person I'm fooling is me. Everybody else sees it. So this is the foundational pillar. You've got to have this one in place in order to move forward. The second pillar is appreciating others' strengths and contributions. And this really flows out of the first one because as I understand myself and my limitations, I understand how much I need other people as well. Somebody one time wrote about a body being many parts, right? And this idea that a foot needs a hand and a hand needs a foot, and the foot doesn't need to compete with the hand, right? We all need each other to function together effectively. And humble leaders do this because they recognize, I need you to be the best version of you. So some people, imagine you're the best salesperson in your company, and you love making money and bringing people in, and you're great at that. If you really understand that lane, then you are so grateful for Janice in accounting because you're like, man, I do not want to do accounting. If Janice was not here, oh my gosh, my life would be miserable. Thank God for Janice. And the more comfortable I am in my lane and know what I have to offer, the more grateful I can be for Janice. And the more I can appreciate her and not have to compete with her. Humble leaders are able to collaborate instead of compete because they recognize that we need the whole body. And they become talent scouts where they're looking for hidden talents in places and trying to draw out the best of what other people have to offer. My friend Davin says it this way, that instead of needing to be in the spotlight all the time, they enjoy being the spotlight for other people. They love pointing attention, saying, hey, look at my friend Susan did over here. Isn't that incredible? Because Susan's success does not diminish my success. I want Susan to be successful. I'm rooting for Susan, and I know Susan's rooting for me, right? We don't have to compete in this way. So that's the second piece, appreciating others' strengths and contributions. The third is a growth mindset. And I could spend hours on this, but the basic idea here is, if you've never heard of growth mindset, is there's kind of two general mindsets in life, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Fixed mindset folks believe that my success is based on my talent, and my talent doesn't change. So if I'm good at math, it's because I just got the math genes. I just lucked out. Or if I'm a good athlete, it's because I was just born that way. And that feels really good at first because you feel like you're a prodigy or you're gifted in some way. But the challenge is that anytime you fail, again, because my connection is driven by my talent, or my performance is driven by my talent, anytime I fail, it invalidates who I am. You know, I thought I was a good soccer player, but I lost a match. Well, maybe soccer's not cut out for me anymore. And so fixed mindset people, they get really excited for the areas they're great at, but they never take on new challenges because they are afraid of being invalidated in that way. So at the heart of that, there's a little bit of truth in that there's something about how God made us and our natural ability that does predict our performance, right? You know, LeBron James is a little taller than me. I think he's probably naturally going to be more fit for basketball than I would be. I think that's realistic to say. But research actually shows that it's not your talent that predicts your success. It's actually your process, your learning, and your growth mindset. In other words, it's not the 7-foot guys that are all great at basketball. It's the ones who are the first ones in the gym and the last ones out. The ones who watch film, the ones who take on new challenges, the ones who stretch themselves and challenge themselves. That's actually the biggest predictor of success. And research bears this out, that success is more limited by your effort than your talent. So if you feel like you're a natural at something and you're not putting in the work, you're not learning, you're not stretching yourself, you're just going to stay at that same level all the time. And I love how Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, captures this. When he came into Microsoft as a CEO, they had a bunch of super smart people who loved showing how smart they were by kind of beating each other up in meetings and arguing and proving that my idea is better than your idea. And it just created this really toxic culture where they're actually not learning anything because they can't learn from someone else, because if someone else has a better idea than them, then, they're smarter than me, and you know, now I'm worse to them, relatively speaking. And so he said, we want to shift from being a bunch of know-it-alls to a bunch of learn-it-alls. We just want to assume that we don't have it all figured out. We're going to go be curious and go learn new things, right? Very much more of a humble posture. And these humble leaders focus more on getting it right, getting to the right answer, than being right. It's not about me being the smart person. It's about us together moving towards a better solution. I don't care who gets the credit. Let's just all move forward. It's not about me. It's about this greater purpose. And that's the last pillar, is that humble leaders give themselves to a cause beyond themselves. Rick Warren says this way, that true humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. Again, it's not thinking, I'm terrible, I have nothing to offer. It's just that my life is not about me. It's about my organization's mission. It's about what God is doing in the world. It's about taking care of my family. It's about serving my clients. And all these things pull us beyond ourselves and help us do things that we would not want to do otherwise. When you look at some of the humble leaders that Collins profiles in Good to Great, some of them were naturally pretty reserved and not really challenging kind of people, but they had really difficult conversations with their organizations. Some of them even almost forced out some of their family members who were in the family business because they were underperforming. Not because they liked conflict, but because they cared about the business doing well. They knew that it would be unfair to shareholders if they did not push for excellence. And so this is the catalyst for humble leaders. It takes you from being just a merely modest person to actually being the kind of leader who gets things done, is you're willing to have those difficult conversations, put in the extra hours, do whatever it takes, not for your sake, not because you want to make more money or whatever, but because there's a grander purpose than you. And whatever that means for you, it's going to vary from person to person and situation to situation. For some of you, it could mean that you need to shut up a bit more, like me. I mentioned earlier being naturally talkative. I am naturally talkative. And I have so many ideas that I could just talk in a small group. I could talk the entire time. But for my greater purpose of people actually learning and growing, I realize that's actually not the most effective thing. And so because of my greater purpose, I need to modify some of my default settings and shut up a bit more. But for some of you, you may be on the opposite extreme where you're the only woman in that leadership team, or you're the only minority or whatever, and you don't want to be the person to raise your hand and say, hey, I think this is a bad idea, because you know that that's not going to be received well. But you know for your greater purpose of the team thriving and serving your people well, yeah, we got to have this conversation, and so you're going to do it. This is the spark that gets humble leaders going. And it's, again, because it's not about them, it's received in a very different way. When Brad was challenging me, it was not because I'm bugging Brad and he just wants me to shut up because I'm making his life miserable, although that may have been kind of true. He wanted what was best for me, and it was that what's best for me thing that came through that made me receive it much, much differently. So these are the 4 pillars, and you can kind of see how, they fit together. Because I have a greater purpose, especially as Christians, I see myself accurately in the scope of eternity and in the arc of humanity. Because I have a growth mindset, I'm willing to rely on other people's strengths and contributions and learn from them because they have something to teach me, and they all feed off of each other. And so if you're a skeptic, I'm a natural skeptic. If you're a skeptic in this room, you may be asking, okay, does this stuff actually work? And I wouldn't be here if it didn't, but just to give you a few little nuggets from research on how this works. Research shows that humble people have lower stress and greater happiness, something like 54% more satisfaction with life, because they have this perspective where they don't have to have it all together. They don't have to keep this facade of perfection all the time when bad things happen, because they recognize, yeah, I have limitations. It's a normal part of life. They have a purpose beyond themselves, and so when something's not working well at work, they're able to say, hey, you know what? Everything's okay. Like, my family's okay. It's not about, looking like everything's all right over here. They're able to take things more in stride. Humble leaders also build stronger teams. There's an 8-part study by Bradley Owens from SUNY Buffalo that showed that humble people, because they're able to admit their mistakes, they create this climate where the people underneath them are able to admit mistakes. And as a result, they're able to grow from those things more quickly. Because when you have a leader who doesn't admit mistakes, and then none of their people talk about mistakes, it's not because they stop making mistakes. They just stop talking about them. And so they just hide them so that they grow bigger and come up later when you can't fix them anymore. Versus the leaders who just show like, hey man, we're all works in progress. That stuff actually brings out those mistakes earlier on so people learn from them more quickly, and their teams are better performing as a result. And one of my favorite studies was by Amy O, and she studied 105 tech CEOs and found that humble CEOs actually produced better financial performance in their firms because the CEOs were able to be challenged by their executive team. They'd put forth an idea, and the team would say, I don't think that's the best idea. And instead of saying, who's got the CEO title here? Who makes more money? Who led this team? They say, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. Okay, why could that be? And because they're open to being wrong, they have better conflict at that executive level, which means they make better decisions, which means they make more money. And so just a few things from research that, again, if you think, this is a nice thing to have, but is this really essential? I think this is really essential. And if you're not convinced, I think that the nail in the coffin is what Scripture says. This is what James says. It says, therefore, it says, he's quoting the Bible, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Let me see a show of hands. Who would like God to oppose you? Let's see. Maybe I can't see all the way back there. Yeah, that should be terrifying, right? You think about all the things God's doing, and then Fred decides to not become humble, and God's like, all right, well, let me set aside everything I'm doing. I'm going to go oppose Fred. That sounds awful. Why would God do that? Does God have some sort of ego complex? Is he insecure? No. C.J. Mahaney in his book, Humility, says that pride is contending for supremacy with God. Pride is saying, my view of the world is more accurate than God's view of the world. My priorities trump God's priorities. And so God's going to oppose us because he's saying, that's actually really bad for you and really bad for the people around you. Trust me, I made you. I know what's best for you. The humble way is the way to go. Now, how many of you would like to have grace from God and be exalted by God? Let me see a show of hands right there, right? I think we can all get excited about that. This is the parable that Jesus tells about the man, sitting at the lower seat, and the host comes in and says, oh, no, come sit over here. God loves to exalt the humble because we are most like Christ when we're humble. And this is the piece that I think that we don't get very often. We often think of humility as, I'm humble because I have flaws, because I'm human. I have to be humble. It's like a bug in the system. I just got to deal with it. But actually, when you look at Jesus, this is who Jesus is. This is how Paul sums it up in Philippians. He says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. What Paul's saying here is that Jesus wasn't humble because he had flaws, because we know Jesus was perfect, right? He was humble because it was in his nature as God. He submits to the Trinity. When he says, I don't do anything the Father doesn't tell me to do. When he says, I only say what I hear the Spirit say. When he says, God, if there's any way, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. In the history of humankind, there's been one person who is actually God's gift to mankind. And he was the least likely to act like it, right? If humility was something we had to do as humans because we are flawed, then God would have been the opposite of that. Jesus would have been the most arrogant, self-centered person ever. He would have walked around and said, hey, bozos, listen, Messiah's in the room. Okay, everyone sit down. Listen to what I have to say. But he didn't. And so that tells me that being humble is one of the ways that we embody Jesus more than anything else. When St. Augustine said, to paraphrase here, he said, if I was going to sum up the primary things in the teachings and the morality of Jesus Christ, the first is humility, the second is humility, and the third is humility. Humility opened the door for Jesus to fill his unique role in the Trinity and to bring about a much greater purpose to earth than what would have, frankly, been a lot more fun and convenient for him. Jesus could have had the first megachurch, right? He could have lived a very cushy life, could have been a multiple book author, he could have done that whole thing, right? But he laid his life down in service of us, even though by all rights he could have just said, life is about me. And so I'm hoping one of these reasons, whether it's the business performance, the stress, or just the spiritual formation aspect of this, something in this resonates and makes you think, okay, I'm open. How do I become humbler? Because that's where we have a chance to go today. And that was a question that was posed to Jim Collins, too, back in 2001. People said, okay, great, level 5 leadership sounds good. How do we do it? And he said, I would love to be able to tell you what to do, but frankly, I don't know. I have some guesses, but we don't have any solid research data to support a credible list. It would just be speculation at this point. And the good news is, in the 20 years since then, there's been a lot of research. And that's what I want to share today is just one research-proven practice about how to become humbler. But first, I need to talk a little bit about how you actually change at a fundamental character level, period. Because what we're talking about is not some sort of technique you can just tack on. It's innate to your character and identity. And there's two concepts that I want to get across before we move into that practical side, and that's bridges and flywheels. So the first is the bridge. One of my big pet peeves with church most of the time, I hope I can say this standing in a church, is that a lot of church doesn't work. Please don't get me off the stage just yet. Here's what I mean by that. We come to church on a Sunday morning and we have a great homily or great message. Pastor Dennis, he's just like, he's slaying with this message, right? You're like, that was awesome. That was so great. Hey, good job, Pastor Dennis. And if I cornered you 2 weeks ago and I said, hey, you mentioned you loved Pastor Dennis's message 2 weeks ago. That was awesome, yeah. What was that about? You'd say, Jesus. There's definitely Jesus. I think Philippians, maybe something in Philippians, right? No, I'm not giving you enough credit. You probably could recite like all the major points of his message 2 weeks later, right? You're smart people. But even if you could do that, and I asked you, okay, so that's great. This message was powerful for you. So what are you doing with that now? Like, how is that impacting your day-to-day? What rhythms or practices are different now? How are you thinking differently about life? I think then at least we'd probably hear some crickets, right? That's because the gap between inspiration and transformation is huge. Having this great idea and actually being changed by that idea, there is a deep yawning chasm in between those two things. Just having good ideas is not enough. If it were, we would be the healthiest, most productive generation ever. Because we have TED Talks, we have the best pastors in the world you can stream anytime, right? We have unlimited inspiration. And yet most of us are not at the level of transformation. Why? What bridges that gap? Well, this is not fun or exciting or fancy, but basically the way you bridge that gap is with application. It's actually putting into practice those ideas. And not just in a like one and done kind of way where you just like, you start something one day and it's done. It's this, as Nietzsche said, this long obedience in the same direction. It's step by step by step doing it. And that's where the flywheel comes in. And the idea of the flywheel is that the things that you do something to you. As you do something, it becomes more of who you are, it becomes more natural, and then that flywheel perpetuates. One of my clients, Craig, he wanted to work out. Actually, he wanted to want to work out. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so we put together this plan for him to kind of get healthy, and he came back a few weeks later, and I asked him, how's it going? He's like, it's so frustrating. And I was like, tell me more. What's frustrating about it? And he said, well, I just don't like it. Like, I'm doing it, but it just feels miserable, and I think I should like it by now. And I said, well, who told you should like it by now? He's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, of course you don't like it. Like, you don't work out, so this is going to be hard and painful. But if you just keep doing it, it'll actually become more natural for you. And I explained like this flywheel turns as you do something, it becomes more part of who you are, which makes you do it, which makes you become more of that, and that flywheel just turns. And I could see like visibly, he just got less stressed, and he's like, okay, that's interesting. Like 2 months later, I talked to him again, and I said, hey, how's your workout routine been? He's like, it's been a really tough week. And I said, why? He said, well, I was only able to get to the gym like one time, and man, I'm missing it so much. It's killing me that I can't get to the gym. I'm like, Craig, like 2 months ago we talked, and you were feeling the opposite way. He's like, I know, but now it's like part of who I am, and I feel, something feels off if I'm not there, right? I think we've had that experience too. You start to do something, and it becomes more a part of who you are. And this is the great thing about our virtues as well, that you don't just have to pray for God to zap you with patience. How do you become more patient? You have small kids. And when you have small kids, you have two choices. I'm going to murder a small person and go to jail, or I'm going to become more patient. And I don't like the odds of me in jail, so I'm going to become more patient. Right? You get interrupted 1,000 times, and you lose it again and again and again until you lose it a little bit less and lose it a little less until you, get so tired that you just give up. I don't know what happens. But no, like you actually become a more patient person because you have to. You practice patience. Humility is the same thing. That if you actually just do the things that humble leaders do, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel kind of fake. It's going to feel awkward. You're going to be scared. But as you do it, it starts to feel more natural, and that flywheel just turns and turns and turns. And so that's what we're going to do today with open-ended questions. We're going to practice doing that together so this becomes a more natural part of you. Asking open-ended questions is a practice from humble leaders because it shows a couple things. That accurate self-perception. If I'm asking you a question, I'm saying I don't know the answer. You might know something that I don't know, which is accurate, and it's appreciating your strengths. It's demonstrating that growth mindset because I'm trying to learn from you. And that greater purpose is there too, that I'm trying to connect with you and help us move forward together rather than me just have all the answers. So I need to have a brave volunteer who is willing to come up on stage and have me ask them some open-ended questions. Who's willing to do that? This is where we get to see who back there. Yep, right there. Yes, come on down. Hey, let's give a round of applause for our lovely volunteer. All right, you can take a seat up here. I'm Josh.
Pam.
Pam, nice to meet you, Pam. All right. So Pam, I'm gonna coach you and ask some questions. Whoops, this other way here. I should have warned you though. This is actually not going to be a very good coaching session. This is going to be a bad coaching session. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's all thank Pam. No. I'm just going to interact with you in like the typical, stereotypical way that most of us would interact whenever someone comes to us for advice or questions or something like that. So, and then if you're up for it, I'll have you come back and we'll do it again, but we'll do a better job next time. So
how am I supposed to get started?
Well, I'm just going to...
In the bad way?
No. You just come and you want some advice for something, like a question you're processing, and I'm here to help you. Okay. So, and you may want to speak up a little bit so that they can hear you back there too, if you're open to that. All right. So Pam, how can I help you today?
Well, I'm really having trouble with my coworker because she really isn't doing the job.
Yep.
And I feel like she's not getting the leadership that she needs, and I'm tired of her coming to me all the time.
Yeah, coworkers are the worst. I had a coworker one time, Stacy. She would show up, and I mean, she was just like miserable. I finally had to like get her fired. I mean, yeah. Have you talked to her boss about it?
I thought I was.
I'm the boss? Oh, gosh. Hold on one second. I got an email to respond to here real quick about her. I think just tell her how you feel. I think that'll probably do the trick.
Yeah, well, we've had those interactions, and I really have reached out and tried to assist her,
Sure.
but it just really isn't. It's the same thing over and over, and I don't think that I'm the person that she needs to be hearing
I know,
from.
right? Yeah, I know. Who is, right? Who is that person, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Again, sorry to say, but
I
that's your
wish I could
role.
talk more. I know. I've got to get something real quick, though, but I think if you just talk to her, it'll probably be okay.
Great.
Isn't that just like painful to watch, right? Okay, can we clap for Pam, first of all? Yeah. All right, so what did you see there that really grated on you that was not actually good listening or coaching or open-ended questions? Phone away, yes, thank you. Yes, not paying full attention. What else?
You did not rephrase what she was feeling.
Didn't rephrase, yep. What else? Eye contact. Something else over here?
Talk about yourself.
Talk about myself? Yes, yeah. Quick to have solutions for problems I didn't understand, a lot of advice giving. Yeah, some not very helpful things. Let's give Pam another round of applause here. If you're willing to come back up in like 5 minutes, we'll do this again, and you can think of a real thing that you want to talk through, if you're okay talking about it in front of the group, and we'll have a hopefully more helpful conversation. Does that sound good?
Sounds fine.
All right. Okay. So that's bad coaching. Here's some of the things that you would have seen there and why this was a problem. One of the mindsets we get into when people come to us for help is we think that the best way to help them is to give advice. Because, I don't know, we need advice sometimes. We think that's helpful. We have a little advice monster inside of us, as Michael Bungay Senior says, or we think we just want to share from our experience and put things out there. And again, that's not super helpful. And there's two reasons why advice is often not helpful. Not always, but often not helpful. The first reason is that advice is often wrong. And it's wrong because I don't know your situation. I'm thinking about a situation I had, and I'm just telling you what I did, and I don't have omniscience to know what the best idea was. And if you come to me and you get bad advice and you do it, then you're mad at me. I don't know what you'd be mad at me. So that's one problem with advice. But the second problem with advice is that sometimes it's right, which would not seem to be a problem because that's why you're coming to get advice, is you want good advice. But here's the problem, and this really comes back to that greater purpose piece of humble leadership. If you come to me and I'm your coach or consultant and I just tell you what to do every time and you go do it and it works and you come back to me and you bring the next problem and I tell you what to do and you go back again, what have I done? First of all, I've created a very reliable income stream for me as your coach. But I've also diminished you in a sense because you're not independent anymore, self-reliant. You think if I have a problem, I just got to call Josh, he tells me what to do. You turn that part of your brain off. And for some people, they can do that and that's fine, but humble leaders don't do that because my goal is that you don't just solve this problem that you're facing, but you become the kind of person who can solve that problem now and the next 10 or 12 problems like that. The advice thing does not really grow the other person most of the time. It makes you reliant on me as the expert, even in the case in which it's right. And so the solution to this is to ask really good open-ended questions. And when you do that and you're present with the other person, the phone's away and you're listening well, it creates three feelings in the other person. A feeling of control, a feeling of competence, and a feeling of connection. It creates a sense of control because when I ask an open-ended question like, hey, well, what all have you tried? I'm handing control of the conversation to you because you can take it any direction you want. I'm taking my hand off the wheel. And that's empowering to you because you realize, oh, wow, this person actually trusts me to have control of this conversation. That's where the competence comes in too, because I'm asking you for ideas, and I'm saying you must have something to teach me. I don't have all the answers. And that's building up your self-esteem. And then third, it creates a sense of connection. Because I'm not in such a hurry that I have to just give you advice and get out. I'm actually slowing down and being with you and trying to understand. And that sense of being understood by another human being is life-changing. If you don't hear anything else from today, just know that you can do this for anybody, whether they're your boss or someone who works for you or a child. When you slow down and ask good questions, this changes the trajectory of people's lives, leaves them feeling better. You probably know someone, you go spend time with them and you talk with them and you just feel lighter and feel more encouraged. They're probably doing this kind of stuff with you. So this sounds good, asking open-ended questions, but this is a little bit harder than it sounds because not all questions are created equally. So I'm going to give you 2 parameters for how to ask some better open-ended questions. The first tip has to do with why questions. Like, why did you do that? If you have small kids and you've ever asked a 3-year-old boy, why did you hit your sister? The answers are almost always disappointing, right? You never hear, well, Dad, I just have unchecked aggression, and I was getting impatient because I didn't get what I wanted, and I know spiritually I should be. You don't get that, right? You get, you take my thing, or I don't know, not very satisfactory answers. And part of the reason that why questions don't get good answers oftentimes is that there's some natural defensiveness that comes when I say, hey, why'd you tip that much? You're asking, wait, should I have tipped more? Did I tip too much? What are you thinking? You're trying to read me, and you start to justify yourself instead of actually analyzing root causes. And so a better way to ask this question is to get rid of the why and replace it with how or what instead. And so similar kind of question, you're still trying to get at root factors, but instead of saying, why'd you do that, you might say, well, what factors did you consider? Or how did you arrive at this decision? Here, I'm helping you focus just by framing the question a bit differently. I'm helping you focus on the variables and the process instead of getting you into a naturally more defensive posture. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the first tip. Here's the second one. The second tip involves questions that are worded like this. Could you talk to him? Questions where you is in the second position. It's the second word in the sentence. This sounds like a pretty benign question, right? But the problem is this actually isn't really a question. This is a suggestion dressed up like a question. I'm saying, I think you should talk to him. Could you talk to him? Right? And this is a little frustrating for people because it's like advice, and they know it's advice, but it feels like you're trying to not make it advice. And I just want you to say, hey, I think you should talk to him. Just come out and say what you want instead of kind of beating around the bush. And this isn't very open-ended because, again, I'm leading you to where I think you need to go. A good open-ended question actually draws more insight out from you and opens up possibilities instead of closing them down to yes or no answers. And so if you see a question that you're about to ask that has you in the second word, just drop that you and rephrase it a little bit. And so you could say, what do you want to do about this situation? Or how could you approach this situation differently? Here, I'm not giving you a suggestion that you should talk to him. I'm saying, well, let's think more broadly. What are other options out there? That's, again, what creates that control and competence because it forces you to then come up with your own solutions instead of me just providing the answer for you as the expert. Does that make sense? I'm not saying there's never times to give advice or never times to be the expert. Sometimes you are. But if you're trying to build up the other person, this is the better way to do it because it's forcing that person to strengthen their own cognitive muscles. And so this is what this looks like. You have closed questions like, why did you do that? Do you think she's mad? Where I'm kind of suggesting, I think she's mad. Do you think she's mad? A more open version of that is, well, how might she be viewing the situation? Have you tried writing things down? That's a suggestion dressed up like a question. A better way might be, what might be holding you back from being effective? Again, here, you're going to analyze and figure out what's going on. And since I don't know your situation, you're going to have a better sense of what's happening than I'm going to as the outsider here. And so the advice, if I give any, will actually be better because it's going to be more tailored to your situation by the time we get to that stage. Here's why this is so important. The best leaders are able to lead to insights instead of leading with insights. In other words, I'm helping create these light bulb moments for you instead of these deer in the headlight moments for you. You've probably had this experience where someone gives you feedback that you're not expecting and not appreciating, and you're kind of blindsided by it. It's called getting feed smacked. I love that term. Instead of feedback, you just got slapped with feedback. And the problem is that the ideas are coming from the outside in. I'm saying, hey, you have a problem. And you're like, whoa, what's going on? I don't have a problem. You have a problem. And we're arguing back and forth. And the better idea is to create those inside out instead of outside in moments. That's the difference of like a deer in the headlights moment where someone's shining their like insight on you and you're kind of like, get defensive, versus those light bulb moments where you're like, you have this realization, oh, I think that there's a better way to do this. And the way to get to these inside out insights is to ask questions that lead to reflection, and then the reflection leads to insight. Some of my friends at DDI, a leadership development company, say, an insight is not an insight until it occurs in the mind of the other person. I'll say that again because I said it kind of fast. An insight is not an insight until it occurs in the mind of the other person. So just because I think I know what your problem is, if that idea is not like registering in your mind and you haven't latched onto it, it doesn't really count. And so rather than me leading with my perspective and my advice, how can I ask questions that draw your own revelations out so that will actually stick for you? Okay, Pam. Did Pam leave? No, she's still there. All right, Pam. Come on up, and we're going to actually have, hopefully, a more open-ended conversation and see just what this looks like in practice. We'll take a few minutes for this. Let's give Pam another round of applause. Thanks for coming back, Pam. All right. So is there anything really that you actually have some questions about that you want some help processing today?
Actually, that is a real problem
Okay.
that I have. But as I was sitting back there thinking about it, the bigger issue is that I'm working that problem and trying to be humble, but I'm up against management that is not, doesn't have the insight into humility. And so therefore, it's making it difficult. I'm trying to practice what I'm doing with this person, but to go higher, I just get stymied. So I guess I need some direction and coaching as to how might I approach someone to help them get that insight and have that recognize that they need to try to help this situation.
Yeah. So to summarize, since it was a few minutes ago and I wasn't really listening the first time.
See, I noticed that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have a coworker that you feel like's not pulling her weight, and you've talked to management about it, and management's not doing anything about it?
Actually, I worked with that person
Okay.
for like an entire period and tried to assist them. And then management actually came back and got upset with me for doing that. So I still try to assist, but not in the effort that I was. And she really isn't doing the job, and it's really pulling down on the whole team. She has value and worth, but nobody's looking to see where they might be able to plug her in and utilize her. I don't want to get her fired, but our team needs help too. So it's just a real draw.
So is your bigger challenge working with her or trying to influence the leaders to do their job as leaders?
I don't know that one is bigger than the other. They just both, it's probably about 50-50 really.
Okay.
Because it's not my job. I'm not over her. We're at the same level.
Yep.
She's a great person. Really, I could say a million wonderful things about her.
Yeah.
There's just an issue.
What would be the most helpful thing you could take away from our brief time today?
I'm really trying to figure out how can I would love to be able to pass on the humility to management, the humility concepts to management so that they might embrace those. Yeah. But in the culture where I work, that isn't, I don't see a lot of that happening.
Yeah. I have a great book recommendation for you. Just kidding.
Right. And I'll just go around passing.
Yeah, that's right.
out.
That's right. Hey, I thought of people who need to be humbler, and you were top of my list. Yeah, I would not recommend that. Okay, so how do you, as someone who's working for another leader, help them become humbler, which is a challenging thing? Yeah. What do you think the core? What's the biggest challenge in that for you that you're facing? What makes it hard?
to be able to have a real conversation with them. I work at home, and so the conversations are always on the phone. Everything's very fast-paced, and there's no real opportunity to. I'm a big people person, and I like to sit down and I like to see the whites of someone's eyes and have a true conversation. Hear the tonal inflections in their voices, watch the facial reactions, because that helps me to know and make decisions on how I guide what I'm saying as well. And that's really difficult at the in-home setting on a phone, and the bosses are really big on the whole chat thing. I'm not.
Yeah, you can't just like swing by someone's office and have a casual conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult.
What emotions do you feel as you think about this situation?
As I think about it, I run the gamut. I mean, I can be really, really angry about the whole thing and just not want to be helpful and just shut down, or just try to remember that everyone's created in God's image, and I need to respect that, and I need to remember that, and that my tone and the way that I approach them is going to affect as much as anything else.
Have you been able to influence them in any similar sort of situations like this in the past?
From my perspective, I don't see that I have made any influence. But it's, again, really hard to judge when you're not seeing the people day to day. And it is a whole new group of people. This whole working that whole thing home just started about a year ago, 11 months ago. And it's with a whole new set of managers that I didn't ever know. So a lot of different factors in there.
It sounds pretty complex.
It is. Retirement soon.
A little sooner, because of all these things. Yeah.
So,
What do you feel like God is calling you to do in this situation?
I know that I'm not in charge. So the best thing that I can do is just continue on the same path, I think, that I have. Try to be helpful, but not, and in a way kind of lower my expectations at this point, because I'm not in a position to be able to change people's minds.
Yeah.
I guess I can just continue to be who I am and refine who I am to be the best and let God handle the rest.
Be the best, let God handle the rest. Sounds like a bumper sticker.
There you go.
Yeah.
I can make some money.
You can trademark that. Yeah, that's yours, not mine. Yeah. So if you were going to do that in this situation, what would be different?
At this point, I think that I'm doing what I'm hearing. The information today has been really helpful to kind of let me know that I'm doing the right things, and there's some things that maybe I can still stand to tweak on myself. Just move forth.
How do you feel as you think about making that decision and approaching it that way?
It's always going to be a little bit disappointing, because I really would like to be able to know. I think as a human, we always like to know that we've impacted someone, but I really don't have to know that. That's not my role. That's God's role. So I just need to make peace with that, and I think it'll be fine.
So if you can't know that you're making an impact, that's God's role. What can you know in this situation?
I can just know that I'm being the best that I can be. I can look at all those things that I can affect. Watch try to be more patient. There's always room for more patience.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I really can work on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Pam. Our time's done, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, let's give Pam another big round of applause. That should be a good sport. Yeah. All right, so what'd you see there that was a little different than the first time around? Rephrase, yep. Summarize and clarify. What was that? Empathic, yep. Uh-huh. Yeah. How did it feel to be in that conversation versus the other one? Like the first one kind of makes you like a little antsy, Yeah. What else? Anybody feel like I majorly dropped the ball because I didn't give her some like great new insight that would fix everything? Anybody feel that way? Like, no? Yeah? For that, I charge $1 million a session, so to solve all your problems. No, I think it is interesting to, in some ways, like, you feel that, and it's a very different feel, right? It leaves you feeling in a very different place. And then sometimes you're still like, okay, but still, like, what's the secret to just make it all go away? And maybe there are some practical things Pam could do to be more effective. We could have gotten into that if we had more time. But how do you think Pam, well, let's just ask Pam. Pam, how do you feel leaving the conversation versus how you felt coming into it?
I guess I feel, I do know that I'm doing the best I can do. It is just disappointing to know that there's really not anything that I can do on a higher level.
Yeah.
So it's a frustrating feeling that still remains, but I just have to focus on what I really can do.
Yeah.
And that's all. We all know that we can't change someone else.
Mm-hmm.
We can only change ourselves.
Yeah.
And getting back to that perspective. And as you said at the beginning, having a good identifying my own self and the other person and putting that in reality. Reality is the only thing I can do is work on myself.
Yeah. That's so true. Hopefully what that situation creates for Pam or other Pams, in the future is a sense of like being seen and understood in a frustrating situation that you can't control. It's pretty frustrating when you're in that situation and you can't control it, and I give you some stuff to do that you've already tried and doesn't work because you feel like I'm just wasting my time and getting more frustrated. But what I sensed in Pam, maybe this wasn't true, but it seemed like even just a greater sense of acceptance and peace of like, okay, well, this is hard and it's frustrating, but I know this is the right thing to do. And if you can leave people with a sense of like, well, I know this is the right thing to do and it's just going to be hard, that's way better than like the frustrating throwing their hands up of like, where do I even start, And hopefully in situations like that, Pam feels like it's not that she has to find a Josh that has all the answers, but realizing, okay, like she said, we know this, I know I need to do this, but it's just like stopping and recognizing, hey, this is the path that I need to go on, and accessing the kind of the wisdom of the Holy Spirit speaking inside of her in that way. Any other like observations before we move on here? Yeah.
You made a good point about shining the spotlight on others. In situations like that, is that helpful? Where like Pam would shine the spotlight on the strengths of this coworker, and mentally, does that help my mindset to celebrate the wins, not the losses? And that encourages that person. Is that a way to apply those two? I like connecting dots, right?
Yeah.
Does that connect those dots?
I think so. I mean, I think. And Pam did that herself, right? Like she recognized, like this, I love this person for all these reasons. They're also frustrating, and like seeing both sides is really helpful instead of just seeing them as a villain. Like they're consciously incompetent and making my life miserable, right? And so, yeah, asking questions to say, well, what is it you like about her? Can help create that accurate self-perception for others as well. That's good. Anything else? Okay. So here's where the practice comes in. I'm going to give you a chance to actually practice doing this stuff together by asking some open-ended questions. And this is not everything that there is to do when it comes to like relating well with people, but this is a small skill, like this micro skill that if you could get better at this, it'll make everything else better too. And so you're going to pair up with people who you're sitting by, so hopefully you chose well in your seats. And pick one person to be the coach, the other one to be the coachee. And so for the coachee, just think about any personal or professional problem that you're wrestling with that you want a sounding board for. And coach, you have a chance to ask some open-ended questions from the GROW model. And you should have got a handout on the way in that has some of those questions. If you didn't, there's still some back there. I haven't talked about GROW at all, but it's really just a coaching process where you start with the goal. You heard me ask that with Pam. Pam, what is it you want to take away from our 5 minutes today? Helping me get clear on the goal. Reality is what's going on. The O is the options. Well, what could you do? And the will is the what will you do? You probably won't get through all of this stuff in the next 10 minutes or so, but just giving you some prompts there as you get stuck wanting to give advice and you're not sure what to say, that may help trigger something for you. 2 final things. Number 1, this will probably be awkward, maybe because you don't know this person and because you're not used to asking these questions, and that's totally okay. You're going to fail with friends here so that when you do this out in the real world, it's a lot easier. And the second thing is that the context may not matter. You heard with Pam, I did not ask, well, what's this person's title? What kind of work are they doing? How long have they been there? All that sort of stuff, because it's not about me learning all her stuff so I can solve her problem. Pam already knows the context. I'm just trying to ask some questions to help her find some glimmers of insight in the middle of that context. So take time to really ask questions that are going to help guide them in that direction. Any questions? All right, let's take 10 minutes to do this in pairs. It's so hard. And as soon as you arrive at that answer in your brain and you're just holding it and pausing and trying to nod and look engaged, it's like your brain capacity of listening just throttled way down and you're catching almost nothing because you're just waiting for their mouth to stop moving so you can jump in. It's so hard to shut that off. Yeah, someone over here. Yeah, that's true. Very good. What about the person's being coached? What was that like, being on the other side of that person who was reading off their sheet very awkwardly looking at you? Yes, in the back.
I am very verbal, and yet I'm not comfortable being very verbal. It's not something that I really like about myself. But I noticed that my coach was very good at drawing out that verbality. And even though it was not comfortable, it was purposeful. Mm-hmm. And at the end, we both got something out of it. Mm-hmm. And I know that as a parent and a teacher, I always feel like I'm doing a good job if both the students and I are getting an aha out of it. Maybe that's true in coaching too?
Mm-hmm. That's a great way of summing it up. I learn things from my clients all the time. They say things and I'm like, my first thought is, I'm an expert. I should have thought of that before them. But they that turn of phrase or that insight. It's wow, that is so good. Yeah, that's a great. If you're not having an aha moment as a coach, you maybe aren't listening closely enough. That was an aha moment for me. Look at that. See, thank you for sharing. Other coaches, I think I saw another hand somewhere over here. No, yes.
Entering with a growth mindset and sure support, right? If you enter into it looking for quick solutions, you end up being those also.
Yeah.
Your own reflections and insights. The experience it stretches you if you truly engage in it.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's easy to want the Savior to come in and just give you the solution. So the thing that you haven't thought of the whole time, but it's probably something you've thought of and tried or haven't tried enough. Yeah, that's good. That's a good insight too. Well, as we kind of come down the home stretch here, we're going to wrap up with just some really practical things that you can take forward and then some Q&A before we give you a chance as churches to break up into small groups if you want to do that. We talked about the transformation gap earlier, that insight doesn't just lead to transformation automatically. I hope today you've had some insight, that there was an idea or a turn of phrase or something that you're like, yes, oh, that's so good. If it just stays there, it's like that great sermon from Pastor Dennis, right? It doesn't actually change. So you have to do something with that if you want it to stick, and you got to keep doing it till that flywheel turns on its own. And so as you just sit here and reflect, what's your biggest takeaway from this session today? Could be something I said, probably more something the other person said as you were discussing. That's where the real meat of this was at. And then real specifically, what's something you want to do differently as a result? And if you actually want to change, if you want to become humbler, you're pretty serious about that, calling that out in front of a group of a whole bunch of people will increase your chances significantly that you do it, because then you'll have a whole bunch of people that will say, hey, you're not really doing that thing you said you're going to do anymore. So if you want to take time to reflect, you can, or if you're a verbal processor, you just want to like call it out, I'd be curious to hear biggest takeaway or action item that you'd want to stick with. Practice makes perfect. Yeah. Yes, over here. Yeah, that's so good. And it's hard as a teacher because like you have your content you have to cover, right? I got to get across all this stuff. But as you've talked about, like getting to a spot instead where they have some cognitive muscles they didn't have before because they've had to like work a little bit harder, that requires some, taking your hands off the wheel a bit more. That can be scary for sure as a teacher. Yes, sir. That's great. Yeah, you're welcome. Is there anything specifically that's actionable from the humility side, since you're already doing the questions piece? Can you repeat that, please? Is there anything practical or actionable from the humility side that you can take to make you humbler as you continue to ask those questions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think in academia, just in the practice itself of counseling, just coming in there with an understanding of I am not the expert. Mm-hmm. It is not my job to feed answers or, paraphrase questions of, well, why did you do that? So just being a humble servant to my clients so that they can facilitate the growth and insight in themselves. So.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing. That's Gary.
I think as a lay leader in the church, one of the things that I'm learning, maybe not as well as I would like or as fast, but so many times we come into the church context with what we think are great ideas, and we can bring about this change. People would just listen to us, we just go tell them this is what you need to do, we got all these resources. But one of the things I'm learning is if we sit down with the other church leaders and ask these kind of open questions, what do you need? How can we assist in ways that could bring about change? And you can be far more effective that way, but it's hard to do that for many of us.
Yeah.
Something I'm trying to learn each and every day.
That's so hard. As the gentleman back in the back was talking about coming out of academia, I remember going into my first job out of graduate school, and one of the predominant thoughts I had is like, what idiot decided to do things this way? Like, this is not best practice. This is the best way. And after about a year of being there, I realized, like, oh, there's a history. There's a reason that this has been done. It may not be the best reason, and maybe the reasons have changed, but, like, there's more of a story here than, like, what I can see. And asking those questions is so humbling because it makes you realize you may have some insight, but it's not nearly as much as you think you have in the process. Yes?
I think there's a tension between wanting to be effective, efficient to get things done, and then the process of developing curiosity and this idea of like what could be. What's this vision that you have, and knowing that time, like we can't manipulate time like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as leaders, as much as we want to say and go to our teams or the people who report to and say, I think that by did I learn, and do I see a new curiosity inspired in that person? Would be really cool.
Yeah, that is good insight. Yeah, the hurry and humble don't really go together very well. It does take time to slow down and do that. And the question that's helpful for me when I'm like feeling a rush to get something done quickly is like, what's my ultimate goal? Because I could get this done fast, but is this what I want? Like, I could cook a brisket in the microwave in probably, 15 or 20 minutes. Exactly. Is my goal that this meat is safe to eat, or is it that it's good? And if it's good, well, I got to get up at 4 a.m, and I got to get some oat chips in there, and it's going to take 16 hours. But man, it's like worlds apart. And it does require some discernment to realize, like, well, do we have 16 hours, or do we have 10 minutes? You don't always get 16 hours. So sometimes you have to choose those battles, but asking, what's my real goal here? Is it to grow this person so they are more capable, or just get this off my desk so I don't have to think about it anymore? And it's helpful to slow down and be unhurried and ask those questions for sure. Yes?
You asked actionable. And my mind, I'm autistic, my mind goes immediately to literal. So I'm going to give you actionable. I am a person who needs to work on humility. And God gave me this wheelchair as a way to help me. And I have a significant person in my life who has a very fragile ego. Fragile egos manifest in pride. I cannot change that person. I can only change me. Actionable, open-ended questions. Everything you said about the open-ended questions. That's going to be top of mind for me every time I'm with that person for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Yeah. And thanks for even just saying I need to become more humble, because that's the title of the book, Humbler Leadership. First of all, humbler is actually a word. I did not make it up, just so you know. But the idea is that all of us could become humbler than we already are. If you are the closest thing to a saint, you could still take one step further in that direction. If you've got a massive ego and you know it, well, let's just continue down that journey, the growth mindset here. And so, thanks for even just owning that piece from today. Terrence.